Your number one job as a founder is not to run out of cash. Your number two job is not to run out of cash. Your number three job is not to run out of cash. Companies truly run out of cash much faster than they run out of ideas. If you're a founder that doesn't yet have the finance, you gotta look through your bank statement. You gotta look through your expenses. You gotta look through your ramp card. Where is the money actually going? You think investors are lazy? They are not. They will call every one of your customers. They will call your childhood friend. We literally do this. Wow. You should be able to answer that question at 3 in the morning if they woke you up. Because the board member taking you on the walk, talking to you about the business, will ask you, and if they don't get a sense that you remember how you calculate or why are you calculating that way, this is when they start losing confidence. If you're interviewing, you should be able to answer the questions on AI. And if your only answer that I looked it up to plan my trip to Barcelona, or I'm creating pictures of my singing cat, that's not enough these days to get a job at one of the AI startups. You should be able to play with these tools just like an engineer. You see me saying that on LinkedIn, finance is fun again, and I truly believe that.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Well, this is a first. We've got somebody who's on the operator side and is now coming back onto the show as a VC. It's none other than Ivan Makarov, operating partner at Andreessen Horowitz and former VP of finance at Webflow. Ivan's job today is to help startups build their first finance function from the ground up. Everything from the first hire to the first audit, and he's the guy who can help you with that moment where you're like, ah, shit, we need a model. In this episode, we talk about the messy, early stages of company building from the financial viewpoint, when you're deciding whether to stick with outsource help or bring someone in-house, and what that first finance hire should actually look like. Hint, it's a business hire, not an accountant. Ivan shares how that decision has shifted over the years, what skills matter most now, and how finance is becoming a more strategic partner. I hate when they say that, earlier than ever. We also get into the practical stuff. What goes wrong in fundraising when your numbers aren't tight, the early stage guardrails that prevent fraud, and why so many startups still get tripped up by basic cash controls. Later, we talk audits, 409As, and the tools that make up a modern finance stack, plus why so many teams overcomplicate it. And yes, we talk offsites. Ivan recently ran one in Poland, and he shares what made it work and what companies get wrong when they try to force connection on a schedule. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Did you know that around 40% of manually processed invoices contain errors, missing data, bad codes, duplicates? And those mistakes don't just slow your finance team down, they cost you money. That's why global finance automation matters. It's not just about saving time, it's about keeping your business safe from costly errors. And that's exactly what Tipalti does. Tipalti is the serious AP solution for serious business. Tipalti automates the end-to-end payables process, handling everything from onboarding suppliers to global payouts, all so your finance team can breathe again. More than 5,000, of the world's most ambitious businesses already rely on Tipalti to make payments in over 200 countries and 120 currencies. With baked-in security and tax compliance, Tipalti gives you the confidence to scale globally without adding extra finance headcount. Give your finance team their time back. Don't let bad invoices drain good money. Visit tipalti.com/runthenumbers. Tipalti.com/runthenumbers. Tipalti, serious AP for serious business. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. And so I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI-powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. So I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com, aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you. Morgan Stanley recently said NetSuite is under the threat of disruption. That's right, NetSuite, the you never get fired for buying it software. So what's the threat? The answer, Rillet. Rillet is the AI native ERP modern finance teams are switching to because it's faster, simpler, and 100% built for how teams operate today. It doesn't take 12 months to implement, it doesn't feel like filing taxes to use, and your accounting team will actually love it. PostScript closes the books in only 3 days. Windsurf, bet you heard of them. They run finance with just 2 people. And Rillet is backed by Sequoia Capital. Yes, that's Sequoia. Unicorns like PostScript and Windsurf and hundreds of other companies have made the switch, and they're closing books in record time. If I were running a finance team today, I wouldn't default to legacy. I'd look at what's coming next, and Rillet is here. You don't want to be that guy at cocktail parties complaining about how bad his ERP is. Wait, am I the only guy who talks about ERPs around a keg? See how fast your team can move. Book a demo at rillet.com/metrics. That's RILLET.com/metrics. RILLET.com/metrics. Ivan, my friend, welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast.
Excited to be here finally, once again.
I think you were my second ever guest, so I wanted to thank you because since you came on, I think we've 20x'd in terms of listenership. So it all started with you, my friend.
It was the beginnings of the product market fit.
Ivan, we met when you were leading finance at Webflow, but now I think you've changed the side of the table that you sit on. What was your path to A16Z?
Yeah, it was an unconventional path. I think it is for everybody in venture. I was at the time thinking about what do I want to do next? Do I do a third startup at the time? I was the first business hire at 2 companies. And I didn't even know the roles like this existed. And as I was thinking about what do I do next, A16Z actually reached out with a job description and said, we want you to come in and build this function here. We think our startups need a lot of help on the finance side. And it looked really interesting because I wanted to build a role again, but also wanted to do it in a different environment. And so joining this firm and this side of venture was really interesting to me. And so I jumped into the interview process, and here we are.
What's hilarious is there's all these memes out there of like VCs adding value. What's different from where you sit is like you're actually leading a function that helps finance leaders specifically, right?
Exactly. Yeah, my role here and the way we think about operating roles, each firm is different, by the way. Operating partner means very different things at every firm. It also means different things here in Andreessen Horowitz as well. But we work with the founders and their leaders post the investment. So that's the number one thing, is actually helping. And I think when people ask me what's the difference between being an operator and being on the operating side of venture, and I say, well, when you're an operator, you're building things. And here you're actually more in the helping business. And that part is oftentimes, obviously you miss true building, you miss being with one company because there's a lot of companies you get to work with there. On the other hand, you learn a lot, and you do a lot of the times, mostly what they need is learn from your mistakes that you've made so you can avoid them. So I get to share a lot of the experiences and a lot of the stories from my past is what they find the most helpful usually.
I bet you get deja vu all the time when you're talking to these founders.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, I have seen this problem and I have made the decisions you're thinking about making. Let me tell you what not to do here, because I had certainly walked in those paths before. A lot of that happens for sure.
I like that you said operating partner can mean so many different things to different people. Like we had Paul Stanzik on, operating partner at Parker Gale. He concentrates on go-to-market stuff. Like he talks to CROs, CMOs at private equity-backed companies all day. It can mean extremely different things if you're doing that at Insight Partners. I remember I worked with an operating partner who helped on like the CTO engineering side. I think it's pretty cool that you sit like where you can help finance people on like, hey, don't step on that mine over there. I've stepped on that before.
Yeah, totally. I've always felt a little bit lonely, to be honest. The boards are helpful, investors are helpful, but most of them have not been in the finance role before, a large majority. You get to a certain point, the questions get so nuanced that you either have to call a friend or you have to call one of your mentors. And I thought, wouldn't that be amazing to have somebody at my investors that are actually have been in the exact shoes I'm sitting in right now and have dealt with these problems, or having a network I can reach out to.
All right, Ivan, I want to talk about building finance teams, and I think you're uniquely qualified to opine on this because you've built finance teams yourself. You're helping a ton of companies do it in the trenches day to day, and you've seen what good looks like. But at what point does it make sense to transition from outsourced financial support to hiring in-house finance leader, a W-2 finance person, for lack of better terms?
I deal with this question a lot, actually. One of my probably top 5 things when I work directly with the founder. When is the right time? And there are common triggers to this. I think one is highly dependent on the industry. If you're in AI, these days you can see AI companies being built into millions in revenue with no finance teams. And you can get away with that. There also tend to be, in general, very lean from the headcount standpoint. A lot of the costs are going on to compute. In other industry, for example, big investors into deep tech. These are the hardware companies. And there, you probably need somebody very early. It could be one of the first 10 employees because the build out and the model and the supply chain and the go-to-market is so complicated. Oftentimes, when you start go-to-market, it could be as early as, if you decide to be a sales-led company, it could be as early as 1 million, 2 million in revenue. It's time to start hiring AEs, and they bring in the sales leader as the sales transitions from founder-led to sales team-led. Oftentimes you deal with the regulatory issues, and it's time to hire one. But most of the time, I would say company can get up to 100 employees without in-house finance leader and into tens of millions in revenue. We are seeing generally that role gets later and later in the stage of the journey. I think the old rule of SaaS was about $15 to $20 million in ARR, but that has all changed. There's not a real good benchmarks for this anymore, is my perspective on this.
Ivan, I like that you brought up complexity, because some people like to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. They're like, well, you hit 25 million in revenue. It's time to hire a CFO or VP of finance or bring everything in-house. But I think it truly is the complexity. Like if you're running a 3-sided marketplace, you may need that first finance hire before you're through $1 million in revenue.
Yeah, exactly. If you have a marketplace, if you have multiple subsidiaries, if you're international, a lot of the companies are now very international from the beginning. If you have people that ask you to get audit done before they can actually buy your product, you will likely need a finance person in-house.
Yeah, if you're selling to the government, you better hire somebody on day one.
Exactly. Yeah.
We had interviewed Michael Tannenbaum, who was the old CFO at Brex. Now he's a CEO in his own right. He was the 3rd employee at Brex, which is crazy. But that's a fintech company that built literally down to the rails. They're a sponsor of this podcast. And it just shows, like, if you're in a highly regulated space, if it has elements of complexity to it where there are multiple parties transacting, like, okay, skip all these revenue benchmarks. Just get an adult in the room quick.
Yeah. You know, what's fascinating, what I've seen a number of times now in the companies we invested into, when it's a repeat founder, finance person gets hired as for the part of the first 10 founders.
No way.
Almost a founding team. Yeah, it's becoming a pattern here. They felt the pain of what's it like to be on your own. Also, many repeat founders they don't know how to do this anymore because they've ran large companies, or they've last sort of touched finance firsthand 10 years ago, and it's very different now. Finance often is part of the funding team. So there's an opportunity in there, and I've seen it with AI companies, I've seen it with deep tech companies and fintech companies. So that's also becoming a really interesting trend.
So if you were building a finance team in 2025 or 2026, what would be the first hire that you would make? And is that the same hire you would have made 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think that my views on that change. I used to always start with accounting, complement, even though I have an accounting background, but just accounting is something that's better done by somebody else because it's self-consuming. I think it's very different now. You have to look at what the business actually need the most. Also, again, it depends on the industry. Like, for example, I think AI still lends itself to very much former investment bankers and people that can build models. Also, people that can learn all the tools and build agents, so on and so forth, nimble people, and the work ethic, right? Like, that's another thing that this new wave of founders are really optimizing for, the work ethic. They're all working 6-7 days a week. the other thing that changed about accounting is that there's a thriving ecosystem of companies, really great outsourced companies that can take you quite far with the accounting support that they provide. And so that changed. And so an accounting controller used to be number 2, number 3 higher on the finance team. Oftentimes it could be 5 or 6. And so you build out the core finance first, outsource accounting with the emergence also of the new platforms and tools. It's became easier. And so I think that is probably what changed, is to look at the industry, would actually just map out what needs to be done in the first 12 months and go from there and optimize like whether even that you need a hire. So that's another question that we often hear from the founders. At the request, when they come to us and say, help us find our first finance hire, we're not giving them the team. That's quite different where we were even 5 years ago, where it's like, yeah, we're going to give you 2 or 3 people. Who are these 2 or 3 people? These days, you're expecting to be an IC for a much longer time.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. A messy or missing cap table might not just slow you down, it could cost you your next fundraising round. VCs get flooded with pitches, and if your equity is confusing or missing, they'll move on fast. Fidelity Private Shares is an all-in-one equity management platform that helps you maintain a clean cap table, an organized data room, and a clear equity story. Schedule a demo at fidelityprivateshares.com, mention Mostly Metrics, and get 20% off. This episode of Run the Numbers is brought to you by Mercury, business banking for founders and finance pros who want their financial stack to actually work together. Now, I don't plug tools I don't know or intimately use. I've been a Mercury customer for a couple of years now. In fact, I showed the Mercury dashboard to their CFO, Daniel Kang, from their finance team right before we hit record on this episode. It felt like a full circle moment. And what I love most is that Mercury isn't just banking, it's operational confidence. I can send a wire to a podcast editor, I can check capital balances, and I can approve a payment for a freelancer who helped me with a tech stack report, all without bouncing across tabs or praying a PDF exported correctly. Mercury's making a bet on builders. Whether you're issuing your first invoice or wiring 7 figures for a warehouse build-out, it's banking that scales with your ambition. Visit Mercury.com to apply online in minutes and see why over 200,000, entrepreneurs choose Mercury to run their business finances smarter. Here comes my banking voice. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group, Column NA, Evolve Bank and Trust, members FDIC. The IO card is issued by Patriot Bank, members FDIC, pursuant to a license from MasterCard. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI-powered this and automated that. But here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials, making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit RightRev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's RightRev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. So just to play back what I heard, a lot of the first hires are business hires. They're not necessarily accounting hires. And they're also people who are going to roll their sleeves up. They'll water the plants in the office. They'll take out the garbage, and they'll help close the books if needed. It sounds like it's an individual contributor in many ways.
Totally. I mean, the many hats that you're going to wear is still the thing. Operators, I think, is the key word that they're typically look for and they want to hire, and execution. The other thing that I'll mention that's been really interesting, so many finance leaders I talk to, even like a growth stage startups, these are the companies that say past 50 million in revenue, in annual revenue, are actually also running go-to-market. This is really interesting. It was normal for finance to run other G&A functions, and for a long time, right? Many times often until you get to like 1,000 employees, and then you start hiring specialists for IT, for legal, so on and so forth. I keep meeting leaders almost weekly that say, I'm also running go-to-market. And I said, why you're running go-to-market? Like, well, because we are in the middle of hiring, or because the founder trusts me the most because the RevOps is part of the finance, or for many various different reasons, but that's becoming a trend, almost like a society of these folks that are running finance and go-to-market.
Yeah, Stephen Headland over at Rillet, buddy of the podcast, I think he's wearing multiple hats because I've met with him on marketing stuff before. I've met with him on finance and accounting stuff. He's a true Renaissance man.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But it's also when the founder just looks around the rooms like, hey, this is what we need to do. We're about to hire 10, 20 AEs and let's start having territories. We need to build up the bottoms up model. Who's the best to do it? If they don't have a really good RevOps already, then that job goes to the finance, and then the finance ends up doing this. So it's really interesting trend.
Hey, you'd mentioned before that there's kind of this confluence of technology that can take you further with a smaller team and also fractional firms that are out there. Can you just expand upon that thought?
I think about this. There's multiple ways. The most recent visual I have in my head, if you think about your business and accounting classes, is you think about balance sheet and P&L and statement of cash flow. How can this be fully automated? You think about the balance sheet, like there are tools for AR. You think about the other side of the balance sheet, there are tools for accounts payable. There's certainly for a long time now existed tools for equity management. And then when you think about P&L, all of these different platforms that have been built for top line, all of these different platforms that are now exist to, for example, optimize your cost of goods sold and to get a real visibility into where you're spending the money. And then you have certainly many, many tools, especially since 2021, 2022, when we went into this real focus on cash flow management, all of the OpEx tools that have been built to optimize your margins. So I like to think about it that way. There's not a really good clear map, but there's so many different solutions for all parts of the financial statements. And so you can think about it that way. And obviously there's some consolidations happening too. And some platforms are building for all of that and trying to cover as many parts of the balance sheet or parts of the P&L as possible. That's the best way.
I love that visualization. What I find fascinating about the ecosystem too is a lot of these fractional firms are actually top of funnel for a lot of the tools that you end up using. So you can, find yourself on a Brex or an Aleph for FP&A or a Rillet or a Campfire by way of working with this early partner. So in many ways, they're not just your trusted accountant or controller, they're your trusted technology solution consultant as well.
Yeah, if you think about some of the larger companies in our space, companies like Ramp, Rippling, they all have Brex, they all have VC partnership leaders now.
Right.
And when you look at their profiles, these folks are usually generally former finance operators. And they have these connections, they have these relationships, they can talk to CFOs and they can talk to the VCs as well and be that channel, that relationship. And these are a very, very important channel these days because a lot of the times, where do the new founders go? They go to their investors and say, what should I use for this? What should I use for that? Also, of course, VCs are good for introductions. And so typically when I would get introduced by my board member and say, hey, can you take a look at this tool? I would say, yeah, sure, I would help you because they were always helpful to me, especially if they're giving me lots of cash. And so that's how a lot of these things get introduced and programs being built. And actually, that's been an exciting part of the role. We here at the firm invest in a number of these finance tools. We just this week announced a Rillet investment. And I realized I can actually be part of the go-to-market as well. I can do events, I can do introductions, I can create thought leadership pieces, so on and so forth, to really bring awareness to the companies that are building in the space. So that's been really fun. And in return, I often get their swag. So that's
the real benefit.
It is the real reason to do it.
That's a lesson on this podcast too, that I tell the companies, if you send me swag, I will wear it. So my wife jokes because she's like, I wish I was an influencer to get all the free clothing that you get, but just like not accounting and finance stuff. I'm like, well, beggars can't be choosers here. I'll wear it and I love it.
Yeah. And then you can hand it over to your kids too. Because sometimes it sends you smaller sizes and all your kids look like walking Silicon Valley.
Ivan, how have the recs changed that you're seeing that go out in terms of skill set and seniority? Because me and you riff on this all the time. Like, what are founders looking for these days?
The hottest experience level, I would say, is 7 to 12 years of experience out of college. The ideal profile is a really solid foundation somewhere, first 5 years that you've spent either at a private equity investment bank or accounting firm, sort of where they really kind of teach you the work ethics and you get exposure to a lot of the things. And 1 or 2 startups. Great if they were very good startups, even if they've had a downfall. But on the other hand, like that's really important because the founders really don't want to risk giving that first startup job to somebody that never been at a startup and don't understand the pace and the kind of I call it the startup DNA, startup gene. And so that's the ideal profile right now. What's interesting, we see many, this is sort of the demand, especially from Series A to Series C companies. And of course, at one point you bring the CFO, but right now, with companies, not as many companies going public, that market is still in a bit of a weird flux.
I'm thinking of the meme of like an entry-level job that requires 10 years of experience. Startup founders seem to want a particular type of person. And I know return to the office has been a big thing. Are these people grinding?
Yes, that is literally what I heard the other day. We want to hire, from one of the founders, we want to hire somebody that will grind their face off. There's also, remember a couple years ago, maybe not 3, 4 years ago, we were all talking about 4 days working weeks, right? That became a thing for a while that everybody's trying to say, can we just work 4 days a week? Now it's the opposite. The term 996 is many startup use is you work 9 o'clock to 9 p.m., 6 days a week in person. So many, especially companies that are going fast right now, that are trying to outgrow each other, they feel like they have to do that. And so don't know how long that stays. I don't think it's permanent, but that's certainly the culture and expectations, especially if you want to work in the hottest spaces at the companies that have raised the highest valuation, the most amount of money. They will expect 150% to 100% out of you.
It's funny how the pendulum swings both ways, right? Like we rotated in one direction around flexibility, working 4 days a week or hoping to, and now it's like pedal to the metal, baby.
It's wild. It's wild. And when I ask them why do you accessors to finance, is, a lot of our jobs are lonely, like you sit there in the model or you're preparing a deck for something. And a lot of it is actually driven by engineering, because engineers do get a lot of value by working together, experimenting together, not being in isolation, especially in this day and age where they're building so many experiments. But the culture of these companies is that they want everybody to be doing the same and to be going fast and to be ready for anything. And so that's the current trend. Again, I don't know where it's going, but you see it in the big cities, especially with return to the office. It's really just 2 or 3 places in the country. It's very much San Francisco again, and New York, and to a degree LA are the three largest tech centers right now, where a lot of activity happens and you see the companies get funded.
Well, you'll be proud that you gave me enough shit that I stopped calling it San Fran and then now call it SF.
Thank you. Yes, please don't. People will not want to talk to you here.
Ivan, what's the evolution of financial operations as companies become more complex?
Well, the interesting thing, another thing that I've been talking to our common friends is that we don't see much BizOps roles these days.
Really?
Yeah, if you think about that, and it's more, again, I think it's became more descriptive. So it's RevOps is the term that most people use for a while was BizOps. And then BizOps sort of became, because a lot of the BizOps team grew to be large and very unclear what they were doing at the company. And now it's really operations. So operations is one of the hottest roles, is one of the first hires. Oftentimes the first business hire is actually the head of operations or chief of staff. Chief of staff is a very, very trendy role. That's also typically requires 7 to 10 years of experience. It's just somebody that will work directly with the CEO, but very quickly when we look at it, it's actually not just chief of staff. They're managing people, they're managing the business. They're not just managing the CEO. That is definitely happening. I think we talked about earlier, finance teams are getting smaller and leaner. There's a certain expectations from the founders that the finance people will use all the modern tools. They will use AI. They will create agents. They will use the models. I've had a number of conversations recently. If you're interviewing, you should be able to answer the questions on AI. How are you using it every day? How are you using it at work? What are some of the edge cases, the most creative cases? That's on almost all job interviews now. And if your only answer that I looked it up to plan my trip to Barcelona, or I'm creating pictures of my singing cat, that's not enough these days to get a job at one of the AI startups. They expect you to be a lot more creative. So you should be vibe coding. You should be trying all the new tools and also be in touch with what's going on in the ecosystem. Every week, there's a big thing. I mean, As we're chatting, GPT-5 is coming out. So there's a lot going on, right? So you should be able to play with these tools just like an engineer.
Do you think FP&A, data and analytics, or BI they call it, and BizOps have all morphed into one at many of these early startups?
Absolutely right. Yeah, I definitely have that point of view. You should be able to do all of that. The other thing that's happening, I mean, I would tell you actually, you haven't asked that question, but I'll say what is the hottest role right now, at least at earlier stage companies, the controller role. And that's the function of a lot of companies having raised money in the last 12 months. Then they've hired their first finance leader, and now they're finally hiring a controller. That's in high demand right now. Even controller roles, when I look at these job descriptions, they're asked to do a lot of the times what FP&A was asked to do. Things like cash flow forecasting, like a long-term or a 13-week cash flow forecast, building out systems, sales compensation, so on and so forth. So even the controllers that used to do mostly just accounting and closing the books every month and getting through the audit are now asked to do more and more with what they have. And so that's all changing very fast and kind of interesting trend to watch.
Do you think bringing on a full-time CFO is being pushed out as well? Are companies delaying that, or is there title deflation going on?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you think about it in terms of, is it the founder market or is it the CFO market? It's certainly founder first market. It's really important, especially if you want to work at one of the bleeding edge companies. They don't give out C titles right now very loosely, even to the people that have been there, done that. So companies are starting, some of them are not having titles at all. And some companies, for example, asking their employees not to be on LinkedIn at all. Like they're going into the stealth mode altogether as they're building. So
no way. You got to tell me more about this. So just wow. So a lot of companies are just saying your role and title is finance. That's it.
Yes, finance. And so it's unclear. For example, you're trying to contact somebody there, so everybody gets the same email, but it's becoming a very common these days not to have any kind of title.
And I wonder if that's good.
Yeah. I think it is good. I think it is good. And it's good for the profession. It's good for the startups. But it's certainly something that I feel like we're moving very quickly towards.
So we honed in on who you should be hiring first. I want to zoom in on that first year itself. When you have full-time help, what should you pick off the pile first as something to do?
So the first thing that you do actually is the data cleanup. You got to figure out what's the state of the data. Well, is the ARR that being reported is actually true ARR. So sometimes what often happens, especially if there's no finance, you have to maybe redo the metrics, look at the definitions, look what's being used. So data cleanup, I think, is the first thing.
Dude, I have to interject. My friend, he's probably listening right now. I won't say who he is or what company. Took a CFO job, got there. He was sold on them being $5 million in ARR, got in, cleaned it. They were at $800K.
Yes. Many such cases.
Yeah.
Many such cases. Very loose definitions of ARR these days, as you and I often chat about. But yeah, data cleanup. So oftentimes you might have to even restate because you can't build a business model. Actually, what the founders really want you to do, they want you to build their first business model or the second version. Many founders actually have the first version that they build themselves. And it's a very good discipline. For any founders listen, please take a step. It's not hard, and will teach you a lot of things that will help you scale a better business and have better conversation with your finance leader later. And so once you build it out, then you look at forecasting. How good can you forecast the business? Very, very difficult right now because there's so many different revenue streams and growth rates are the highest we've ever seen it, but sometimes the contraction rates are also highest we've ever seen it. In the age of what we call AI tourism, sometimes that revenue goes up and then it goes down 3 months later. And then, of course, you look at your unit economics. You're trying to figure it out. Okay, what's the real, like, how much can we keep burning the cash? At which point can we be profitable? Or when do we need to raise? So what I call it the discipline, right? And of the business. And then, of course, oftentimes the finance leader also gets hired ahead of the next round. So maybe you need to fundraise, strengthen the business, strengthen the amount of capital that's on a balance sheet. And I would say then, obviously, as you're doing that, hopefully accounting is in okay shape. And then you start thinking about audit readiness. But that's another one that I think was one of the first things that the head of finance or VP of finance or CFO had to do, which is now getting pushed out into the future because many of these companies, even at scale and hundreds of millions in revenue, have no plans to go public in any near future. And therefore, audit readiness is less important.
That last piece is so fascinating that it's less important. I could see it being important less so for going public, but like if you're, I'm just making it up, like an Andrew who's going to work with the government, or if you're going to work with a healthcare company as a customer who's lots of like PII, but like that actually blows my mind that people can push. I mean, I would do it too. Push out the audit if you don't have to do it.
Yeah. In those cases, by the way, if you're one of these companies that does need an audit, you just need an audit. I mean, you go to a regional firm and you get it done for a smaller scope and less fees sometimes, but you don't need a Big Four audit until you're really thinking, okay, maybe we'll go out in the next 3 to 5 years. At which point, of course, the best is just to go with one of the Big Four firms.
So I did the first ever audit at Parts Tech. I wanted to make sure it was a Big Four. In retrospect, like what's the advice that you give? Should it be a Big Four the first time around? Does it matter?
If it's a high growth company and they're ready for an audit, I generally recommend Big Four, especially if it's a VC-backed company. You just end up redoing a lot of the work that small company may omit doing. If you don't have that path, if the growth trajectory is more modest, then certainly you can go with one of the regional firms, top 20, or even a smaller firm, and get that done for much less scope is what usually happens. And that's more from the regulatory reason, but the general advice I have, go with them. They have very competitive pricing. Set the expectations. One tip I have is make sure you don't just negotiate the first or second year audit. Make sure you have very clear expectation and conversation with them what the first 5 years of the audit would look like. Because if you don't, then the year 3 can triple, quadruple, 5x what your first year was, because that's how these Big Four firm economics work.
It's a good thing we sold Parts Tech because I did not ask that question. I had no idea that the rates got that high that quickly.
Yeah, they lose a lot of money in the first couple of years, and then they start having conversations, well, we got to start recouping that money.
It's just like a startup, man.
Yeah.
We've established that a lot has changed, but one thing that has not changed is the number one reason that companies go to business is that they run out of cash. Does that still hold up? Like what are some of the other trials and tribulations companies are going through these days?
That is still true. I was just yesterday talking to our speedrun founders. We have a batch number 5 right now in LA. And I said in the opening remarks, your number 1 job as a founder is not to run out of cash. Your number 2 job is not to run out of cash. Your number 3 job is not to run out of cash. I just want to get that message very clear, because companies truly run out of cash much faster in the majority of the cases than they run out of ideas or they run out of energy. And so that is the biggest mistake. I think the other ones, of course, are things like existential things can happen. The competition comes in. Like we said, the growth rates are really insane right now in some of the businesses, but so is the contraction. And so you can, especially if you can't raise the next round. And some of the other things are pretty common, I think. It's the founders oftentimes just don't have the energy. They close the shop and they can't raise, so they shut it down. Product market fit, I think, is the hardest thing. What was really interesting to me, the more time I spend talking to our investors, we remind our founders the hardest round you'll ever raise is going to be your Series B. So
why? Okay.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? So the seed round, you come together. The seed round, there's you invest into a founder, into their idea. Sometimes one or both, or one of the two. Then your Series A is really about product market fit, however it's defined. Like you see companies reaching that. It could just be traction. It could just be buzz around the company or the number of users that might not be paying. And then from then on, it all becomes about monetization and seeing, okay, how do we take this company from, let's say, $10 million in revenue to 100 to $1 billion, so on and so forth. And so Series B is really about all of those things working and working really well in a repeatable fashion. So people are buying the product and there's a repeatable go-to-market, wherever it is, right? Product-led growth or sales-led growth or so on and so forth, all of the different models that we see now, but it's working in a repeatable fashion. You just need more capital. You just need to put more on the business. You need to hire more people, or you need more compute at this point in this day and age. And so you go and raise money, but most companies don't get to Series B. And then the other thing to think about, if you're raising money from top tier VC firms, if you raise your seed and Series A from one of these top firms, you will raise Series B. It's really hard not to raise Series B from that, but that's also hard, of course. So all of those things combined make Series B the hardest round to make.
Do you need to have proven unit economics by then, or is it more about repeatable go-to-market?
It's really, in my view, it's more about repeatable go-to-market. I think the Series C is really about becomes about unit economics and how can you scale this business to a public company is the bet that the founders make.
I want to go back to cash real quick. Early cash controls all founders and first-time finance leaders should have in place.
Number one thing, and this is a very frequent conversation for me, is have it in more than one place. And I often tell people about everything that we had to live through back in 2023 when Silicon Valley Bank had its crisis and a collapse. And that was time we all remember where we were on that weekend, what we were doing, so on and so forth. Many of us pulled all-nighters. That is the number one thing that they could do. And many of these new founders have not lived through SVB weekend, and so they think it's safe, it's in one place. And the second thing is you want to have it parked somewhere safe, which is one of the global banks. So we're talking about JPM or HSBC, or banks are too large to fail. I mean, if JPM is failing, we're all failing.
We have bigger problems.
We have bigger problems. But it's important to have a bulk of your cash there. And if you're using one of these newer products like Mercury, like Brex, like Ramp, you can certainly use them. Many founders prefer using them over anything else because the UI is so good. But these are bank interfaces. These are bank UIs. So you should still have your cash with one of the banks that are too big to fail. So that's the most important thing.
Some of these neobanks, though, they say, oh, well, you can get FDIC insured up to like 5 million, 6 million because we're spreading 250K like 20 times over. What do you say to people when you hear that?
Read the fine print is what I say. There's a fine print in all these billboards. They've gotten really good at this. And again, these are great products. I've used them. I'm a big fan of them. They're just so much better than whenever you log into one of the global banks interfaces and you don't even know how to add a user. And so they're great. But what I say is they're great for operating a bank account. You should still have regular sweeps. You should still have money sitting, someone where you could call and somebody that you know that institution will come and save. Because the important part of the fine print, who are these banks are actually banking with? And you will see names that are typically that you don't recognize, you've never heard about. And so if that happens to Silicon Valley Bank, we know it could happen to any other banks. So just diversify, I think, is the important point here.
I want to talk about bad actors. So that has changed a ton. I was targeted so many times as a first-time CFO, not just me being targeted, but people on my team, because like they didn't know how I communicated with people yet. So it's like a very vulnerable time when you hire somebody new from the outside. So much so that there was this running joke in Slack that fake CJ is trying to ask for money again. So how do you protect yourself from fraud in today's day and age if you're a startup founder?
Question everything. To your point, I think phishing is getting really smart. Somebody emails you in very clear English with small cap letters and sounds like one of your buddies or sounds like your CEO. These days, the AI models are so good. You just listen to the CEO on YouTube and you can imitate them very well. I think the key is just to be very careful. And also the key is to have the cash visibility. If you're a founder that doesn't yet have the finance, you got to look through your bank statement. You got to look through your expenses. You got to look through your Ramp card. Where is the money actually going? And take a look through all of that. And the same way I tell them, yes, your AWS bill or GCP bill or all of that is multi-page PDF, but spend some time reading it and just to make sure that you're carefully using that cash because it's still your responsibility. And that is still the most common reason how founders get fired is they not just misused the cash, that actually just lost cash. And so that's the dangerous part here is that till you have the head of finance, it is your role still as a founder to make sure that nothing happens.
I like how you said that. It's still like, you always got to have that top of mind. Like the buck, for lack of a better term, stops with you there.
Absolutely.
Ivan, you've seen a number of fundraisers go down in your career. What are some of the finance-related issues that can derail a successful fundraise?
I'll tell you the quickest one that I see somewhat regularly here on this side is that you make up metrics. On the spot. You think return is this. You also make up customers. That's sometimes often too. You should know exactly the number of the customers. If you don't know, just tell them I'll get back to you because you think investors are lazy. They are not. They will call every one of your customers. They'll get on the call and they'll confirm that you said what exists actually exists. They'll do due diligence. They will call your childhood friend. We literally do this. And so to find out as I get a reference on the founder. And so that's probably the number and the quickest way to just add to get the fundraising. And of course, all the venture firms talk to each other. And so the reputation spreads far and wide very quickly. I think the less, the number two thing is I've been thinking about it is you just you don't have a clear vision on why you're fundraising, how much you're fundraising, what your valuation should be. I'd say never go out to the market and start clearly talking to the investors that you're raising until you have thoughts in mind. And by the way, I think current investors that you have can really help you there. So just go talk to them. They may tell you now is not the time to raise, but you say, but I still feel like that it's time to raise. And if I was to raise, what would be the good term? So you know that, and you know why. You should be able to answer why. And the third one is the basic stuff, accounting. It's the diligence stuff that just doesn't pass the sniff test. It's metrics. They will question your metrics, and they will ask you, how do you define churn? How do you define your net revenue retention? I mean, CJ, you've opened my eyes many, many times on your long rants about NDR, NR, AR definitions. Everyone does it so differently, and it's really fascinating. And so, of course, businesses are free to do that with non-GAAP metrics, but you should be able to answer all of these questions and say why you picked that metrics and why you're calculating, say, your net revenue retention the way you do.
Now, there is a gray area, and I'm not saying it's okay to, move the margins around a bit, but like customer accounts, what if you have in this day and age, I don't know, customers who are just trialing your product, or maybe it's a car on multi-year deals. Like, you've probably seen some wacky stuff.
Great point, for sure. That is an area where some folks get, I would say some definitely creativity around this, but also sometimes just they haven't thought this through.
And that's honestly, that's usually why it happens, because they haven't thought it through. They're not being malicious. They just they don't have a perspective on it.
Yeah, exactly agree with you. And so you should have it. You should have a definition. I'm actually, like we talk about invest reporting, the due diligence rooms, have all the definitions. And if you have metrics in your deck, have an appendix that is the last slide. Here's how we define this. So you avoid long and painful calls. Why are you doing it this way? Skepticism on the side of the investors. And so, okay, this is just how they're defining it.
My biggest advice to any founders or early finance leaders out there is to footnote the formula for any metric just at the bottom of the page. Like, I know it's a little bit more work, but like the amount of follow-up you get on how you calculated something, and then you have to sometimes calculate it like live on the call just to get them out of your hair. Just do it. Put it on the bottom of the slide.
Yes. And if it's not there for whatever reason, you should be able to answer that question at 3 a.m. if they woke you up. Because the board member taking you on the walk, talking to you about the business, will ask you, and if they don't get a sense that you remember how you calculate or why are you calculating that way, this is when they start losing confidence.
I also see like loose definitions of churn, and it's bad if you're churning customers, but it's also really bad if you can't tell your board like how you quantify that, because you lose their trust instantly. Like, if I can't get from you like when a customer leaves versus comes into this business, for me to be able to predict how durable your revenue is, like you've lost the crowd.
Yes, absolutely. That is one of the big common mistakes of how you lose the board.
Ivan, when I've come aboard companies, one of the first things I've taken over from the founder is the 409A. Are companies getting those done more often now? Maybe you can just start with just an overview of the point of doing a 409A to begin with.
Yeah, 409A is something that's required for each company to be done at least once a year, or if there's a material event. Material event, typically most common one is the fundraising. It could be other things like founder left, or if you acquire a business that may be larger than yours, you have to redo your 409A. Change of control, you maybe did a secondary transaction and you have a new stake on the price. Actually, a lot of secondary transactions are happening now in this market that is not still high volume of IPOs. And so you need to have that because you can't issue equity without an active 409A. And so it's very difficult to actually recruit candidates if you're in the middle of the process of 409A. Oftentimes, the advice I give to the finance leaders or the founders is that you're fundraising or you already got to sign the term sheet, then immediately start working on 409A, because that process can still take you 2 months to complete. It would be great if you also have a 409A right out of the bat, so you can continue to hire. You don't have to say, we don't have a 409A right now, so I can't fully explain to you how much your equity is worth. But it's really important to have an active one on file and be diligent about it. But most companies still, up until even the pre-IPO stage, do it once a year. You start doing it more often as you get on that pre-IPO readiness, like 2 years out. You start doing them more often so you can get a more accurate price. But once a year is the IRS requirement.
I want to flip the script a bit. So you also talk to prospective candidates a lot, and you have an amazing network of finance leaders. What do you tell them to ask before joining a new role, especially one of these high growth AI companies, about 409As?
Yeah, find out what the equity is really worth. I mean, that's the real upside in the business. Cash obviously is very clear and you can benchmark the cash, but candidates that spend a great amount of time understanding the value of the equity, the potential of the equity. Ask the founder, have a conversation with them. How do they value their equity, so on and so forth. I think founders have gotten much better with this in the last few years. They're able to tell the story. It's extremely competitive now with the rounds are happening sooner, the valuations being high, but you should have that understanding of what the potential is, because you will spend next few years at that startup and you want your equity to multiply. And so it's really important to understand how they're thinking about it and what's the equity instrument. Sometimes surprising, people don't even understand the basics of stock options versus RSUs or the new sort of products are emerging in this day and age. And so I actually recommend this to everybody. Everybody should have that conversation with the company before they accept the job offer.
And for anyone who wants to learn how to explain the value of equity to your employees without crossing the line, Ivan did an amazing job on our original episode. So scroll all the way down to episode 2. That's something I know that he's passionate about as a finance leader. I want to transition to talk about the finance tech stack, something that me and you nerd out on all the time. What are common mistakes that startups make in choosing their accounting and finance software tools early on?
I think they think that everything can be automated is probably the number one mistake. You see, everything can be automated is the mistake that they made. And that's what a lot of the billboards say. And a lot of the marketing is like automate your whole finance stack. We certainly have made significant amount of progress in the last 2 years. I think there's a whole new generation of products emerging. What term I heard is Gen 3 of finance stack. If you think about Gen 1 is the Oracle 80s and 90s. Gen 2 was the Salesforce and NetSuite. The Gen 3 is now all these modern new tools that are AI first or have AI functionality, but they really talk to each other. In that, as that wave emerges, there still need a human review. You still need a human touch. And so it's either can be outsourced or finance team runs it. But I think the most common mistake is just starting with really bad data and not doing what we talked about earlier, doing that data cleanup, the project data cleanup as you come in and you redefine, relook into everything. And then if you do it early, you experience that pain, then everything else just gets cleaner, and then you can build a modern finance stack on top of that.
Do you feel companies are buying finance tools earlier or later than they used to?
I think earlier. Yeah, absolutely. It's we now recommend companies to do it at a pre-seed stage, that they can already implement 5 or 6 things that will make their lives much easier. We're talking about payroll, we're talking about cap table management, we're talking about accounts payable, and of course the ERP. And that's important to do early, to start what I call a good finance hygiene.
I was laughing the other day. A friend said to me, "Not all startups have revenue, but all startups have expenses."
That's a great quote. I am going to steal it for sure.
But it makes sense. Like, that's why you need some of these tools. A lot of times they'll be like, "Oh, well, we're not at 5 million yet. We don't need to move from this to that." It's like, well, you have people working there, don't you? You're taking trips places.
Yeah. I think you're familiar with, I'll reference L4M blog post by Jason Lemkin, where you build the model where you look at your average revenue run rate for the last 4 months, and then you've predicted. It's the simplest way to forecast. I actually been big fan of doing that on the OpEx side, is you can look at your average operating expenses in the last 4 months. You can do it from a cash flow burn perspective and look at it forecasted that way. Any founder can do it. You build it once and then you do it. And you should be able to get a handle of that. Of course, in an ideal scenario, you have both revenue and expenses, and you can just build a simple forecast. That is the simplest way to do it.
So when me and you started back in the Stone Age, there were like 2 ERPs out there. What is going on? This is crazy. They're coming out of the woodworks.
The space is really, really hot, for sure. I think we've all been waiting for this era to come in. We all have a lot of trauma associated with implementing some of the older systems. Things are finally changing. I think we just kind of lived in this Stone Age for too long. There's an inertia in finance. We were okay with the tools because, as you know, once you put one of these systems in place, it's okay, it works. You don't need to necessarily replace it. But a lot of these startups are emerging and they don't want to live with the status quo. They don't want to put the ancient tools. Founders, I think one of the common things that the founders expect from finance is that the tools are used are modern and the UI is easy. They should have access to it. They want to be able to poke through the data and run scenarios themselves. And so the ERP space is very, very hot because we just haven't done anything in the space for so long. And AI is enabling us to make these things easier and reporting, so on and so forth. So I'm really excited to see Rillet, see Campfire, and other companies are really building and operating at exceptional speed and execution. So
another one that I'm really passionate about watching their rise is Quanta, because what they do is they marry agentic services with the ability to close your books faster. And so one of my observations on just the state of the finance stack, it's not just more tools, it's what services can you accompany it with, because it doesn't have to be done by people anymore. It's like agents talking to agents, not even just the agents on one system, but it could be like Brex talking to Navan or something like that.
Yeah, I do probably at least one demo a week. Just want to be familiar with the space and what's happening. And I often get asked as a finance person, like, what do you think of this tool? And my general observation, still, we're not at an age where AI is replacing people, but AI is most certainly replacing labor in every parts of the business. And especially true in accounting, especially true in finance and forecasting, strategic finance. There's a lot of labor, a lot of manual stuff that we used to have to do, like writing an investor letter or coming up with a board deck or charts and graphs, so on and so forth, that used to take hours, can now take minutes or seconds. And that's a really exciting time, because I think the most fun part about it, the labor that's getting made, is the labor that you and I used to hate. But now we don't have to hire people for it. We can be good at it with just prompts. And with these new modern platforms, it's so easy. You see me saying that on LinkedIn, finance is fun again, and I truly believe that.
I call it the 11 p.m. labor, the stuff that I would do like at the dinner table. Like, I'll admit, I was having a beer because I was stressed out, and I'm trying to finish this like before a big meeting in the morning. Like, I think that's a lot of the stuff that's going away.
Yeah. And that's a lot of, there's no brainer to buy these things when you have a spending budget.
It makes sense. It makes sense. I'm also fascinated by like founders having a perspective on like how the UI, the UX looks. Like, for so long, we accepted stuff that was so clunky and so ugly. It's like people just thought finance people were okay with stuff that was gross looking.
Not anymore. You can't have ugly software products. Same way, by the way, this is another podcast probably we could do, is investor reporting. You can't have ugly decks.
Yeah.
In the age where things just look beautiful everywhere, you're expected as finance to produce things that are good looking.
So like part of how I made my rise is being the guy who can make a beautiful deck for the CEO and CFO the night before. Like, I was the guy they would come to, and I could help them tell the story with it. But like, as the marginal cost or effort goes to zero on that, I'm like, wow, that's no longer a moat. So it's like, what's the skill that you need to get more face time with the CEO or CFO if it's not making the deck?
I think it's still a very, very important skill, especially as you can't have people to delegate because the teams are smaller. You don't get the head count. But I do think maybe the most important skill right now is actually get really good at prompting. And you can, of course, do that in personal life all day long, just using ChatGPT. But as more and more products now have chats that we use day to day in finance, all the same prompts that work at ChatGPT when you're planning a trip to Barcelona, you should also be able to dig in and understand exactly what happened in the marketing budget, so on and so forth, with some of these tools that are not coming out, as you're able to actually chat to your financial statements rather than go to your accounting team.
I'd be lying though if I said that AI didn't make mistakes. Like, I know humans make mistakes, but like, I have made a ton of mistakes with AI and numbers. I'm still trying to figure out how to sanity check it. Like, do I run it on a different LLM? Do I ask the question a different way? I've even found mistakes. This scares me when I've said, can you think about that again? And then they're like, you're exactly right. That was wrong. I'm like, no, wait, what if I didn't ask you that?
You're absolutely right is one of the scariest things that you can see out of the LLM, for sure.
That's an if you know, then you know, like, what do you mean I'm absolutely right?
Yep. And you can't fire them on the spot. Unfortunately, they're still there.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Gearing towards a close. I texted you recently and you said I'm boarding a plane for Poland. Where are we going?
Seeing a portfolio company for an offsite. We have a portfolio company in Europe and their finance team is based in Poland. It was a really exciting trip.
What makes a good finance offsite?
Good finance offsite. Actually, the number one thing is facilitation. If finance offsite is work and play or work, then really what's critical is facilitation. I don't think anyway, if you're not a good facilitator yourself, or if you don't have time to plan a very effective offsite, then you should just outsource it. Hire somebody. There's professional facilitators out there. Sometimes your investors can facilitate an offsite, the CFO coach or something like that, or former retired CFO who have done it many, many times. That is probably the number one reason why offsites are ineffective. And so I'm a big fan of that. And then, of course, have a purpose. Understand what it is. Is it the bond? Is it to get work done? Is it just to reinforce the culture on the team? Or maybe sometimes it's a new team. This specific offsite was the first time they all got together in person. And so just take time to build the relationships, build trust. And all of a sudden you come back all re-energized and like, God, I really work with some really cool people here.
I think the mistake a lot of finance teams do is they'll only do an offsite like when it's annual planning season. It's like, oh, so that's the only time we're going to meet. And then we just have to work in a room heads down the entire time.
That for sure. Yeah, not often enough is a very common mistake. I also see sometimes they're too short. They think, oh, our offsite can just be a 1 day or 2 day. I think 2 or 3 days is the ideal time, especially if you don't do them quarterly. Yeah. It's like a twice a year thing. Once a year thing, you may want to do a longer one, spend a week together. But I do think it's important. It's even important if you're all working in person. It's really good. This is what we do here at the firm. We all work together. We do a lot of in-person time, but we still go offsite because there's something about just getting away, putting away your normal work schedule, different mind space, different agenda, different things. You have a prep for it, and then you have a very effective facilitation or team building activity or whatever it is. I like to combine both. I like 50-50 format personally, where 50% work, 50% play. And there's a long burn on the offsites. I think that's one of the few positive things that we got out of COVID is we actually started doing them a lot more, and that became a thing.
What we would do, because we were 100% remote, is we would get together 3 times a year, 4 times a year, and each member of the team would play host, because there's always a back and forth of like, okay, where are we going to go? And we took the guesswork out of it. So like in Q1, we went to where Colin lives in Colorado, and he was responsible for planning all the activities. In Q2, we went to where Jamie lived in Minnesota and went to the Minnesota State Fair. So I also think it's cool, like when you put it on to somebody else to be like, show me around your city.
Absolutely. We've done the exact same thing at Webflow, where different members of my team would be the locals, and they know all the spots. They do the program. They're actually really excited to show you the hometown. And it was really fun to visit them and see them, and we would rotate. I think that's a really great idea.
When we went to Minnesota, I'd never been to the Mall of America. It's huge. And so we stayed at a hotel, but it was connected to the Mall of America, which was very convenient. But by the 3rd day of the offsite, I realized I hadn't technically left the Mall of America in like 60 hours.
Yeah. That could happen. That can definitely happen, which is why I'm like, build some fun stuff into the activities, into the agenda.
You can do way more fun things in Europe too. I did one in Switzerland, and it was like an open bar and also archery at night, and it was lit by like fire. I was like, this would never fly in the US. This is a huge liability.
Yes. We did an offsite in South Carolina once, and what we did, we were throwing, not hammers, what are they called?
Axes?
Were throwing axes. Yeah. Yes. Not the kind of a thing you'll find yourself doing in California, but it was so fun. So that's another good thing. You go to this destination, different cultural things are there, and you get to experience them for the first time.
Cool. Well, Ivan, it's always fun to hang out with you, man. I really appreciate you taking time to come on.
Great to be back, and really amazing to see where the podcast went since we first started chatting.
And I'll catch you in LA in a couple months, right?
Sounds good. Yep. Cheers.
Run the Numbers is a mostly media production. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by Meg D'Alessandro. Show is executive produced by Ben Hillman. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog way too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses. LOL. If you like this podcast, hit subscribe and give us 5 stars. It will take like 2 seconds, and our algorithm overlords love it. Drink water, call your mom, and have a great day. Peace.